ihanum inigwi ifinalofonya ihanum.
As Pacific peoples, we have a deep and sacred connection to water. Yet all around the Pacific, communities are on the ground organizing to protect this life-giving source in a fight for our lives. I spent the last year on a journey through the Mariana Islands and to O'ahu Hawai'i, documenting indigenous resistance against U.S. imperialism in protection of water. In their homelands, I spoke with protectors who remind us not only of the deep importance of water for our very survival, but share the ways that water is embedded in our language and life ways. So I'm about to get on a flight to Saipan and meet with some of the activists, some community members, to see how they feel about the ways that the military expansion is impacting the region. It's important to note that the military expansion that's currently happening, you can see so much of those realities here in Guam, but it's not just Guam being impacted. There are just under 1 million square nautical miles of ocean that are being used for training exercises by the U.S. military. When I arrived in Saipan, I connected with members of our Commonwealth 670, a grassroots community group doing critical work drawing attention to military training as part of the Mariana Islands Training and Testing Area, or MIT, which is close to 834 million acres of open ocean around the Mariana Islands and near the Hawaii Range Complex, used for military live fire ordnance testing and training and deadly sonar activities. OCW 670's Kathy and Zeno discussed the group's efforts to de-escalate militarization and conduct educational outreach in the Marianas.
Since we first started getting environmental impact statements back in late 1990s, there has been an expansion in the region, how much land will be used, and also our waters that surround us, especially with the Mariana Island Training and Testing Area, which has expanded with all of our water resources around these islands. And it's really connecting a lot of the spaces between the islands.
To further understand the impacts of the expansion, I spoke with Master Zoamti, or traditional healer, Saina Donald Mendiola, who expressed his concerns about the ways military training is harmful to Chamorro cultural systems, including millennia-old traditional healing practices.
Water means a lot of things in our culture. Even the ocean is armored. Actually, the ocean is armored for the body. When people are sick, sometimes the Zoamti would take them to the ocean. And that's water. And we want to keep our water pure and clean. Even the ocean has to be clean because we take our patients along to the ocean. We make them bathe. We put herbs and stuff on their bodies and we make them bathe. And so it has to be pure. It has to be just salt water, ocean water, and not chemicals added to it because that would destroy the spirit of the healing from the ocean. And then if they're going to increase the militarization in the Pacific, it definitely is going to affect. It may not be tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, but down the generations. And that's what should not be happening. We have to protect the future generations from all that. We don't want anybody coming out of the ocean with rashes or cancers or sores or whatever due to our country, our United States, practicing on their weapons out there in the ocean where we go out and we depend, and our ancestors have traditionally depended on the ocean for their livelihood because they have the lemai, they have the suni, mindioka, and everything on land, but then they get their protein, most of their protein from the ocean. And we don't want any toxified fish that we're going to intake into our body and to our system to make us sick.
Matua Council for Native Chamorro Advancement President Liana Hofschneider imparted wisdom about the importance of water to Chamorro lifeways and language. Her advocacy work stems from leaving the island to pursue higher education, then returning home to the realization that the interests of the native peoples were not being prioritized.
I noticed that every time I come home, I notice that a lot of things that are, critically important to us as Chamorros, as Native people here, become almost like a second priority. And it saddens me. So I believe that, having a focused voice on what are very important and essential to the survival of the Native people are the very core of this organization. So we do a lot of advocacy, and especially in public policy. And we so-called, so-called watchdog of, a lot of the public policies. Public policy really directly affects everything from, and especially our natural resources, and our access, to our natural resources and our access to, these sacred spaces. When I think about water, it's who we are. Water to me is life, linatla. The root word ha, it's life. Ha is hanum, hagum, your air, ha'uf, your chest where you breathe, right? That's breathing. And ha'i,
One issue of particular importance to Hofschneider in respect to the impacts of military training in the Marianas is the ongoing bombing of No'os, or Farallon de Mandanilla, a tiny uninhabited island north of Guam, less than 2 miles long and half a mile wide. The U.S. military has been bombing FDM for training purposes since 1971. Recently, it got permission to drop 4,000 more explosives there every year, along with tens and thousands more rounds of ammunition.
We all have to take our time when they're not testing to go and see how beautiful she is. Because the way they're doing it, I don't think the next generation would have the opportunity to know who and what No'os was. No'os to us is very important. It's our gathering place. And how do you transcribe that? If you go to Western Fisheries Management, those are the folks that look at our waters. You will see how important No'os is because it's a large spawning reef. That's where all the fishes, gather to reproduce and provide food for. And our ancestors are, know this. They've left some footprints. They don't tell us this. They don't even tell us in our books. The only thing we know is FDM, Farallon de Mandanilla, named after some Spanish, colonizer. But No'os is a very important bird, and we want to talk about that bird. It's an extinct bird. It probably has DNA somewhere, and that's what I want scientists to find out and help us find out where's this bird. Because when I talk about No'os, it's like a foreign language, but it's not. Our ancestors have provided us. They drew it in, pictographs and things like that. And so why am I very emotional when you ask that is because I know in the way they're doing their practice, because it's not only the U.S., it's their allies also practice there. Japan, everywhere. I mean, anyone that have an ally, they go and practice and they fly their jets from as far out in Iowa or Nebraska up here to test that pilot's endurance, and then bomb and then go back. We want to have a relationship with the United States. And part of that relationship is for security, national security. But I don't believe and I don't agree that we would have to compromise our health, our survival, because our health is our survival. The footprint of the military footprint on how it does its business on the island in a very fragile environment is another issue. And it's prevalent that when we talk about expansion, both in Tinian and here, in Rhoda, I haven't really heard much about, military expansion there. But in Tinian and here, the environment is like a second issue. It's always talked about how the economic benefits and all this and also of course national security, but they don't put a lot of emphasis. And correct me if I'm wrong. I challenge anyone to come out there and tell me publicly that they've put a lot of emphasis on on how the environment is not going to be impacted or going to be impacted, and at what certain degree of that impact is, because I haven't seen and I haven't read, and that concerns.
I am against that. I am against militarization in the small islands in the Marianas, including Guam, because we're all Marianas. We're one Marianas. The islands are small enough as they are, and the islands won't get any bigger. We're in paradise. Well, maybe heaven, maybe better than paradise. And so we have to protect our culture. We have to protect our resources. We have to protect our inheritance from our ancestors.
In addition to MIT activities, groups in the Marianas are organizing to raise awareness about the effects of military actions in our home islands, from plans to establish a series of live fire training ranges, high caliber live fire and maneuver training, bombing in the land, waters, and airspace in Pagan and Tinian, islands north of Guam in the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas. These training activities are called the Commonwealth Joint Military Training, or CJMT plans.
We're still waiting for the CJMT, the Commonwealth Joint Military Training, the next EIS to come out. So it wasn't stopped. It's going to be proposed again. And again, the public is just really concerned that how many comments do you need before you realize that this is not a livable situation. We're 184 square miles of terrestrial land. We only have so many acres that you can grow food on. You only have so many acres to collect water to recharge your aquifers. What's it going to take to go, this is too small of a land mass with limited natural resources. This is too much of an impact, and especially for the indigenous people here.
And there's something to be said about, a lot of departments and agencies try to find a compromise between, local indigenous interests and the military. And usually compromise is a very good form of way of getting things done and moving forward. But when you think about the sheer permanent impacts that, these actions have on land resources and people's livelihoods, compromise isn't enough. It's not going to cut it, because what it's doing is so much more permanent and so much more harmful that doing a compromise is detrimental to the people who are most important, which is the people here.
We're discussing public trust. We thought during the NEPA process we were actually getting good comments that would be accepted, and just repeatedly hearing no significant impact from what they proposed when you're talking live bombing ranges, live fire ranges. I mean, if a bomb doesn't cause irreparable damage, why is it being used as a weapon?
I visited David Henkin in O'ahu, Hawaii, a senior attorney at Earth Justice who represented the Tinian Women's Association, Guardians of Ghani, Pagan Watch, and the Center for Biological Diversity in a lawsuit challenging destructive CNMI joint military training plans.
Started proposing moving Marines to Guam, they were saying, we can just continue with what we've been doing in the past on Tinian, which is just small arms fire, so target practice basically with bullets. And then they actually discounted any possibility of doing training in Pagan, saying it's too far away, it's too remote, we won't do anything there. Then, after they made the decision to move the Marines to Guam, they come out with this draft environmental impact statement for their training in the Northern Marianas that suddenly revealed that what they actually wanted to do was turn Tinian and Pagan into major war zones. So on the island of Tinian, it wouldn't just be limited to bullets. It would be mortars and artillery, and there'd be aerial gunships and amphibious landings that would damage the coral reefs there. Up in Pagan, the situation would be even more dire. They were basically looking at the island, forgetting about the indigenous people, forgetting about the families that call that island home, seeing that it's temporarily unoccupied because of the volcano and saying, okay, we're going to use this as our new target island. And they were going to do aerial bombardment and ship-to-shore shelling and amphibious assaults with live fire. And basically the entire northern part of the island, which is where the village was before the volcano, would be turned into an impact area. And when they examined that in the draft EIS, they said, oh, well, there won't be any impacts to people because there are no people there, forgetting about all the families who were eager to return home. So, what really just struck me was the military's complete lack of transparency and honesty about what was in store for the Northern Marianas if Marines were going to be stationed in Guam.
In April of this year, the DoD threw out some of the proposed training plans for Guåhan and Tinian after 27,000 comments were submitted as part of the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, process. NEPA requires federal agencies to examine the potential effects of their proposed actions on the human environment. Revised plans for the Northern Marianas have yet to be released.
It is definitely too soon to be popping any champagne over the changes in the Northern Marianas, because all we've seen so far is a press release from the governor of the Northern Marianas and a couple of vague statements at a public, press conference from the Navy. Until they actually release a new plan for the Northern Marianas, no one should feel comfortable that bombing Guåhan and bombing Tinian are off the table. I mean, if there's one thing that my decades of litigation against the military have taught me, is that unfortunately, they really can't be believed. What they say one day can change 180 degrees to the next.
I traveled to Tinian to speak with community advocate Deborah Fleming with Tinian Women's Association, one of the plaintiffs in the Earth Justice case. She agreed that while some plans for the Northern Mariana Islands were revised, it's important for the community to continue to keep their ears to the ground.
And what we've always observed, that things change. And even with the TWA lawsuit, right? And it went up as high as the Ninth Circuit. To me, nobody won, nobody lost. But what it did is I believe it forced us locals, those are the who would be directly impacted, to be diligent in paying attention to what's happening. Put your ears to the ground and find out what's happening, so that in the event that, MIT, Merck, and oh my God, all those huge training plans, once they start being implemented, that we need to speak up, because that thing is still alive. We can still, then we need to, the next phase of trying to protect our environment. Yeah, 'cause things are always changing. So that thing basically said, if the plan is so long and things tend to change, then we're not going to enforce the full NEPA requirement. We're going to do it by phase as the need arises, as the change arises. That's what that meant. So your question, we have to be diligent.
Today, I went on to the CGMT EIS website to see, is there any announcement about when we're going to get a revised draft EIS? Because the last draft EIS said they were going to basically render life on Guåhan impossible. Well, if they're serious about, scaling back the training so that we're only going to have training with bullets like we have historically on Tinian, and Guåhan's once again off the table, well, they need to tell us what the game plan is, and they have to do it not in press releases and in press conferences. And so where is it that they're going to do it? And that's a question that the Navy just simply hasn't answered. It's like, well, where's that going to happen? Now, it may be that all of a sudden they've decided that all these things that are listed in their manual about what's necessary to be ready, that they've changed their minds, as I said, as they often do. From one day to the next, something that was absolutely vital for national security becomes something that is antiquated, and we're going to move on from it. And so for years, people concerned about protecting their lands from the devastation that's associated with military live fire training have said, why can't you do more simulation? Why can't you get some of the training that way and spare us and spare our land the insult of all that military training? Now, I'd be thrilled if the Navy were to come forward and say, hey, we don't need to do any of that anymore. The Marines can be totally mission ready without doing it. But I am skeptical about their claims that all of a sudden that's off the table. I think that people should not be lulled into a false sense of complacency and say, hey, mission accomplished. because it hasn't been.
You know, now with the Ukraine-Russia war situation and where China, sits, it's making everybody nervous in the Pacific, and we should be.
While military and government officials have said plans for the Northern Marianas have been revised, construction on a divert airfield in Tinian continues, which poses a threat to Tinian's primary aquifer, nearshore environment, and the health of the general public, whose main water source will be compromised by a proposed fuel pipeline that would transport fuel to the airfield's fuel tanks. This airfield would be offered as an alternative to Andersen Air Force Base in Guam if Guam were to get attacked. The $161 million project is pegged for completion in 2025.
So you cut across perfectly beautiful property. You devalue it, especially with jet fuel. Even if it was going to be buried in the ground, how can you develop that land? You just devalued our land. Please change that. Just follow them all the way up and go up to your own property and make a line up there. And you can pollute your own property up there because it's already being polluted by all the flights that are going in and out, right?
They're proposing a pipeline to bring fuel from the port all the way to the airport. It's going to be an underground pipeline. The study that was used by the military was not founded a peer-reviewed study. It was actually a study that was with the Stratum Group, which is supported by funding from the Koch brothers, which of course support pipelines. And their statement was, this is safer than what they're using right now, which is transporting by truck. So we questioned that using just that study and other studies. And we also pointed out all these pipelines that have had damages and leaks. What's really detrimental for Tinian is this over their primary aquifer for their drinking water. So that's what we're concerned for Tinian. But we totally respect that the people on Tinian, they are also looking for ways to boost up their economy. And we're just there to support them for what they see as best for the community.
In all of their internal analyses, they looked at where are the alternate training locations if we have Marines based in Guam. And the answer to that was the Northern Marianas were the only feasible place to go. I mean, in theory, you have training areas in the continental United States where you can do all this training, but that's thousands and thousands of miles away. You do have training areas that they're currently using in Japan, but Japan is eager to, be done with that and has provided, at least as of that time, no assurances that Marines would have access to any of that training in mainland Japan. And sort of even through all the negotiations between Japan and the United States, it was clear that there are a lot of different permutations. They went from originally wanting to move 9,000 Marines to Guam, and then even the US EPA said, you're going to totally overwhelm the water system. There's just no way that this island could support that many Marines and their dependents. And so then they went to rotating through Guam on relatively short term basis and looking at moving some of those Marines and rotating them through Australia and Hawaii. Okay, and all of these are permutations that should have been analyzed in an environmental impact statement to make an informed decision. None of that was done. But, so what we were pressing for in the lawsuit was, let's look at a reasonable range of stationing alternatives other than Guam. So why does it have to be Guam? In a modern world where you can deploy forces quickly by air, why are we going with this sort of 20th century thinking that Guam is the forward location? Why can't we have a smaller contingent that rotates through, and maybe Australia, maybe California, maybe Hawaii? I don't really wish it on any place, but if you're going to make a rational decision about where to station troops, you have to do it in a transparent way. You need to do it through an environmental impact statement so that the people have an opportunity to give input. The people have an opportunity to see what's going on. And eventually, if the people are not comfortable with the decision the military makes, the people need to be able to have that information to take it to elected officials. Now, the Navy, deprived us of all of that. And we still haven't seen the answer to the question, why does it have to be Guam? I mean, frankly, If you're concerned about North Korea, Alaska's closer than Guam is.
David holds a unique perspective as an environmental attorney who has litigated against the military for decades and has represented groups across the Marianas and Hawaii in matters related to the impacts of U.S. military projects on the environment. Currently, he represents the Sierra Club Hawaii in ongoing litigation surrounding the Red Hill water crisis, an environmental disaster and cautionary tale for Guåhan as our community rallies in protection of our freshwater aquifer. David noted patterns by the U.S. military, including a lack of public trust, communication, and transparency.
Right around Thanksgiving, military families drinking the water out of the military's own water supply started turning on the taps in their kitchen, and it smelled like a gas station. And people were getting sick, and babies were getting rashes, and people were just feeling horrible. And still, the Navy command was telling their people the water's safe to drink. Don't worry about it. So the thing that was most upsetting was the lack of just common decency, really, to be straightforward with people.
While in O'ahu, I joined a bus tour led by O'ahu Water Protectors, a group on the front lines of the Red Hill water crisis. Also on the tour were members of Red Nation, a Native organization centered around the liberation of Indigenous peoples from colonialism, and Slow Factory, an environmental and social justice movement. On the way to the gate of the U.S. Pacific Fleet Command, Keone DeFranco, a lead organizer with O'ahu Water Protectors, spoke about how the community's pleas to shut down the Red Hill fuel tanks continue to be disregarded by the Navy.
First recent spill happened in May of last year. Second spill happened in November of last year. And it did not become public knowledge until over a week after that November spill that there was petroleum in the water system. So that included Thanksgiving weekend when military families came and sat down, gathered, and drank water that the Navy knew was fully contaminated. And then 1,000 people went to the hospital, and they had to come forward and give some kind of explanation because Department of Health and others were demanding what is going on here. That's the only reason we even know that this spill occurred. The May spill was not made public knowledge before that had happened. And so in early December, a coalition of Kanaka activists decided that something needed to be done. Red Hill is a difficult movement. There's nothing to physically block that impedes what's occurring. Unfortunately, we can't physically make the defueling happen any faster. So we have to use other political, and social media tactics. And so what was decided was to create a COA. And a COA is a form of spiritual gathering for the community to come together, and in this instance, to feed by water. And that is, we're feeding Kane here, Kane Kawai Ola, to give us that nourishment as a movement to continue to fight. And what was created there was a ki'i of Kane, and that is a wooden physical manifestation of him standing there protecting us, and right at the front gate of the Pacific Fleet here. And so this aina here was chosen because it is state and county land. And it was a frontline activation. Activists came there that morning not knowing what was going to happen. Police were called in, and there was a conversation that occurred. And the police that arrived understood what was happening there and let it occur. And so that was in December of last year. Since then, there really has been no movement by the Navy at all. They've continued to stall, continued to make excuses.
At the gate, as a token of solidarity, I offered water from Guåhan's northern coastline at Tinian, currently under threat from the establishment of a U.S. Marine live-fire training range complex. Navy security interrupted our visit to the COA.
Okay. This is state and county land, though.
Well, yeah, I'm just stating, okay?
Okay. Well,
The COA is you guys got to face it that way, and I can't be on camera.
But this is state and county land, right?
Yeah. But
Yeah,
you guys need
okay.
to face your cameras that
Well,
way.
you can call the police so we can speak with the police.
But you guys need to face
You're not,
that way.
though. You work for the Navy, yeah?
Yeah, Department of Defense.
Right, which is not the police of the state of the county.
Go that way.
This is state of Hawaii land.
Yeah.
We're going to be leaving in a moment, but
Okay.
just to get jurisdiction down, you don't have jurisdiction here. You do not. You can call the police. We could have that conversation.
Captain Jeff Miller, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Navy Pacific Fleet Command, overseeing the Red Hill defueling efforts, also walked over to our group at the COA and exchanged words with Keone, who had the opportunity to remind the military that the water protectors are always watching.
Giving them an update.
You don't have the best one. My wife's you. Need anything?
Not today. We appreciate it. You have a good one. Yeah.
Always watching.
So are we.
While we were doing our pule and our prayer, initially, the chief of staff for the Navy at Pacific Fleet Command, Jeff Miller, came out. Someone that we've had discussions with in the past, who, at that moment, was one of the senior members in charge of the defueling of Red Hill. Came out to kind of check in on what we were doing, and then kind of gave a side comment that he is basically monitoring our online presence and what we're up to. And that is something, as an activist, that isn't funny, and that we understand we're continually putting ourselves out on the line, fully exposed as civilians. But after that interaction, we continued with our pule. And following that, a security guard from the front of the base came out, basically telling us that we had to leave and we couldn't film in that area. But we had understood already from doing activation on that INA, on that occupied INA, that in this particular moment, while this is still sovereign Hawaiian Kingdom land, that this is also state and county land. And the Department of Defense doesn't just have jurisdiction to be able to do whatever they want. They have to follow the rules of law. And in that moment, he couldn't tell us to leave. And so we had an interaction in which I reminded him, you can't tell us to leave. If you want to do something, feel free to call the police, but we don't have to move because you're telling us to. And he followed up, we're the Department of Defense. We can do and say whatever we want. And we were just saying, you cannot. In this moment, you're wrong. Step away. We're going to do what we got to do. We're doing prayer here on our occupied land, and you got to go. And eventually he walked away. But it was one of those moments with so many activists from around the world together, just to show, the active military occupation of our land. While we are trying to do prayer and protection of water, we continue to get harassed on our occupied land on a daily basis. But that was a special and powerful moment to share together in solidarity.
The next day, I attended a community event at Thomas Square in observance of Laho'iho'i Ea to commemorate the restoration of Hawaiian sovereignty and as a way to give voice to Hawaiian independence and issues surrounding militarization. While at the event, I met up with Joy Enomoto, a Kanaka Maoli activist who spoke on the importance of collective solidarity throughout the Pacific.
We know that the U.S. Navy, 93,000 people being poisoned by jet fuel, is literally the equivalent number of of the displacement of Marshallese from nuclear testing. They don't care about poisoning 90,000 people. They don't care about displacing those people. In fact, I think that if the Navy had its way, it would literally, let the water be poisoned. And that would mean so many people would have to move and the military could do what it wants. So we need to not just the community, but not just Hawaii. Other people, other parts of the world need to show up for each other to stop this. Because if it's not here, where's that fuel going to go? It's going to go to Guåhan. It's going to go to Okinawa. It's going to go to other parts of the Pacific that are already over inundated by military activation. This constant state of military readiness means that we are always, and particularly right now, there's just this posturing that is similar to the way that people postured toward Japan before World War II. It's a similar kind of buildup and threatening that happened in my grandparents' generation, right? And it may not be that we go to war, but if we do go to war, we are the ones who are immediately affected, right? It'll be Hawaii as the head of as they say, the head of the octopus. We are going to be the most impacted. We will suddenly be under martial law. And not only that, so would Guam, so would Samoa, so would all these different, militarily military occupied places that come under the US. And that includes the Philippines and even places that are supposedly not the US left, right? The US doesn't leave.
Kehanani Abad, an organizer with O'ahu Hawai'i, a coalition of Native Hawaiian organizations rising in defense of Red Hill, was a panelist during a discussion on Red Hill at the sovereignty event. She noted similar patterns by the U.S. military across the Pacific.
I remember the day that it was a Friday, I think. And Ernie, who's our head of our Board of Water Supply, and he's been fighting this fight for a very long time. He came on the news and basically said that they're shutting down the wells that are tapped into this aquifer at Halava, and that he didn't know if we would ever turn them back on, and that it might not ever come back online again. And when he said that, and when we all, everybody at work, we were all talking about it, we were all having the same reaction, like, I can't believe that just happened. Like, how could that happen? And you know, he and so many others had been fighting this for a long time, and we may never get that aquifer back. It might never come back online. And so the threat of that, yeah, it's devastating.
National security has never been about us. National security is about securing American interests and keeping the business lanes open. If this was about security, we'd have clean, our water wouldn't be threatened. If this was about security, we wouldn't be so occupied. We're actually targets, right? So there's never been a real concern about Hawaiian security or national security. They allow false missile alerts. They allow all kinds of contamination. They bomb our sacred sites. This is not about national security. This is about a constant state of insecurity.
Fanuhutan zaunagi menitano nafan hujung siha bobo nafan hujung siha saduk zan matan hano